Welcome to this explainer. Let me ask you a question right off the bat. Do you ever feel completely, hopelessly stuck in that endless, repeating loop of the modern workday? You know the drill. Wake up, commute, work, rest, and do it all over again. If you've been feeling kind of trapped in a routine that just seems increasingly unfulfilling, you are definitely not alone. So let's dive right into this, because today we're going to explore exactly why we feel this way, and more importantly, how we can actually find genuine meaning amidst the modern grind.
For years now, basically every workplace article has been screaming about one thing: burnout, right? We've all felt the sheer exhaustion of pushing that metaphorical boulder up the hill day in and day out. But recent data is telling us that the landscape of our exhaustion has actually changed. So I want you to ask yourself a slightly different question right now. Are you really burned out, or are you just bored out?
This shift we're seeing in the workplace is fascinating. As recent reports point out, burnout is all about exhaustion and overwork. You're giving too much. But boreout, this newly recognized, totally distinct phenomenon, is completely different. It's what happens when employees actually have shorter workdays, or maybe fewer tedious tasks, but they find themselves completely underutilized, just floating, lacking any deep connection or meaning to their work whatsoever. They aren't checked out from exhaustion, they just aren't really there. And the sheer scale of this problem is absolutely staggering. A recent State of the Workplace report highlighted a shocking 21% jump in disengagement risk in just a single year. Why? Well, the sources point directly to a massive 80% adoption of AI in the workplace. Think about it. Companies took away a bunch of the tedious tasks, which, hey, sounds great on paper, but they didn't replace those tasks with anything meaningful. So now we are looking at a systemic crisis of boreout. Part 1. Sisyphus and the Absurd. Finding modern meaning. To really understand this crisis, we can actually look back to the 20th century philosopher Albert Camus. He centered his whole philosophy on a concept he called the absurd. And the absurd is basically the massive clash between humanity's inherent, desperate desire for meaning and the completely indifferent, chaotic universe we actually live in. When you apply this concept to the 9-to-5, it hits hard. The repetitive, mechanical routines of corporate life act as the secondary layer of absurdity. We desperately want our jobs to matter, but the environment itself often totally fails to give us any true purpose. Camus articulated this existential dilemma so perfectly through the Greek myth of Sisyphus. You might be familiar with this framework, highlighted by Paradigm Academic Press. Sisyphus was condemned by the gods to an eternity of completely futile labor, rolling a massive boulder up a steep hill only to watch it roll right back down, again and again, forever. Honestly, it's an incredibly powerful metaphor for our 9-to-5 jobs. We answer the emails, we attend the meetings, the day ends, the boulder rolls back down, and we do the exact same thing again tomorrow. Part 2. The Corporate Wellness Trap. Fixing the Wrong Problem. Now, modern businesses absolutely know we're struggling, and they try to fix this boreout, but man, they often entirely miss the mark. For example, the book The Work Cure, edited by David Frayne, outlines an actual experience at a university wellness seminar called How to Be a Productivity Ninja. Get this, for over £2,000, employees were taught these absurd corporate hacks like weapon savviness, Zen-like calm, and, I kid you not, stealth and camouflage. They were literally advising employees to hide from their colleagues to get work done. It just completely highlights the triviality of these superficial fixes when you're trying to apply them to deep, structural burnout and boreout. Another major corporate fix we see everywhere right now is gamification. A Wharton neuroscience study looked at Amazon and explored how adding game-like elements, points, badges, leaderboards, can activate the brain's reward system, specifically dopamine. The whole goal is to tap into this need for autonomy, competence, and relatedness, aiming for a quick 15% productivity boost. But if we view this through Camus's lens, this is essentially just painting Sisyphus's boulder bright, shiny colors to distract him from the utter futility of pushing it. Which brings us right back to David Frayne's The Work Cure. The authors in this text make a really compelling argument. They say that these corporate interventions, the mindfulness apps, the productivity seminars, the gamification, they actually just mask deep structural realities with a thick layer of toxic positivity. They put the burden entirely on you, the individual, to fix your stress, completely ignoring things like a total lack of autonomy, impossibly heavy workloads, or just the overall structural issues inherent in the modern workplace itself. Part 3. Psychocompulsion and blame. Shifting the blame.
This actually leads us to a much darker side of corporate wellness. There's a concept called psychocompulsion, which describes the intense drive to modify the attitudes of people who are struggling in the modern economy. The narrative usually goes a little something like this. First, systemic economic issues create a very real problem, like unemployment. Next, the state or the corporation mandates a mindset or wellness seminar to fix it. And finally, when the structural problem inevitably persists, the individual's negativity is blamed. Systemic societal issues are completely rebranded as your personal psychological failures.
The sources provide this heartbreaking anecdote of this exact thing in action from an unemployment seminar. There was a 60-year-old man named James. He'd worked in retail his entire life, but suddenly couldn't find a job. Even his recruitment agent admitted straight up that it was age discrimination. But the seminar trainer rejected this systemic reality entirely. Instead, he looked at James and told him that the only barrier was in his mind, that James's mindset was the real problem.
The authors point out how inspirational quotes are so often weaponized to enforce this exact narrative. At that very same mandatory welfare seminar, they had a bright red piece of paper hanging on the wall with a quote from billionaire Oprah Winfrey saying, "The greatest discovery of all time is that a person can change his future by merely changing his attitude." The authors of the work here argue, and quite powerfully, that using this kind of language in a mandatory setting just acts as a tool to erase any political or economic explanations for structural problems. Basically, if you don't succeed, well, you just didn't have the right attitude. Part 4, Reclaiming Existential Autonomy. So, here's the million-dollar question. If corporate wellness is a trap, how do we actually push back and reclaim our autonomy? The absolute crucial point is this: meaning is not found in career titles. According to the Stoic mentality analysis of Camus, true meaning isn't derived from external achievements or social status or climbing the corporate ladder. Your job is just one single part of your existence. It doesn't define your worth as a human being. Real meaning is forged in how we consciously choose to respond to our daily conditions. Camus strongly advocates for an attitude of revolt. Now let's be clear, in the context of the 9-to-5, this revolt does not necessarily mean marching into your boss's office right now and quitting your job. It means a conscious refusal to accept life passively. It's an internal rebellion. You reclaim your freedom through pure awareness, flat out refusing to let the routine define your entire sense of self. Let me share an incredibly practical example of this that popped up on an absurdism forum on Reddit. A user shared their personal strategy for battling depressive episodes, and it was by creating what they called a mundane checklist. The tasks are super simple: feed the dogs, go to work to pay the bills, go for a run. But by consciously assigning a greater purpose to these everyday actions, responsibility, survival, physical health, they take back control of their day. Like the user noted, it's just a checklist of mundane things. It's really not much different than pushing a rock. But it brings them happiness, and it proves that meaning requires our conscious participation, no matter how small or boring the task might seem. Part 5. Imagining Sisyphus happy. Joy amidst the mundane. If life really is a boulder we have to push every single day, how can we possibly find any genuine joy in that? Well, Camus ends his famous essay with this absolute revelation. He says, "The struggle itself towards the heights is enough to fill a man's heart. One must imagine Sisyphus happy." Sisyphus realizes that the struggle itself is his life, and by pushing that boulder with full, clear-eyed awareness of his absurd situation, he actually becomes the master of his own fate. The act of resistance, that conscious engagement with his burden, becomes the ultimate act of liberation. So, on a totally practical level, how do you push your boulder? The sources outline a few key takeaways for us. First, own your experience. Actively separate your job from your self-worth. Second, cultivate presence in your daily tasks, rather than just sleepwalking on autopilot. Seek passion outside of work. Challenge the routine wherever you possibly can. And most importantly, embrace your freedom through choice. Even within rigid corporate constraints, you still control your attitude and your response. True fulfillment isn't some shiny badge a company issues to you. It's something you have to make for yourself. Which leaves us with this final, provocative thought. The constraints of society, the harsh economic realities, the complete absurdity of the 9-to-5 grind, these things are not going away anytime soon. You can't escape the boulder. But as you look at your own daily routine, remember that the power lies entirely in your hands. How will you choose to push it tomorrow? Thanks so much for joining me for this explainer. I hope it gave you a fresh perspective on the daily grind. Catch you next time.